The lawyer cleared his throat and slid the document across the polished conference table. "Ms. Brooks, can you confirm this is your signature authorizing the sale?" I stared at the swooping letters that spelled my name. The ink was blue, not black like I always used. The N in Natalie tilted wrong. My actual signature had a distinct loop in the B of Brooks that this one completely missed. "No," I said calmly, "that's not my signature." Across the table, my sister Paige shifted in her leather chair. She didn't look at me. Instead, she studied her manicured nails like they were the most fascinating thing in the room. Her jaw was tight, and I noticed a small muscle twitching near her left eye. The lawyer's eyebrows rose slightly. He glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension that had been building for months. Behind him, the floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Chicago skyline, gray clouds gathering for an afternoon storm. "I see," he said slowly, making a note on his legal pad. "That complicates things significantly." Paige finally spoke, her voice tight. "We can discuss this privately, Natalie. No need to make this difficult." I met her eyes for the first time since entering the room. "I'm not the one making this difficult." The lawyer continued reading from his notes, his voice professional and detached. "The shares of Brooks Manufacturing were sold yesterday afternoon to Apex Industries for $8 million. The transaction was completed and funds have been transferred." Just like that. 20 years of our family's legacy gone in a single day. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face perfectly still. I'd learned that trick years ago in business negotiations. Never let them see the panic. Never give them the satisfaction of knowing they've landed a blow. Paige exhaled loudly, like she'd been holding her breath for years. The sound was almost relieved, victorious even. She leaned back in her chair, and I saw her shoulders relax for the first time since I'd walked into the room. "It's done," she said, more to herself than to us. "Finally done." The lawyer looked uncomfortable now. He shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact with both of us. "There may be legal implications to consider, given Miss Brooks' statement about the signature." "Legal implications," I repeated quietly, testing the words. They felt solid, real, like something I could work with. Paige waved her hand dismissively. "It's a family matter, we'll sort it out." But we both knew it was far too late for that. "My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 41 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building Brooks Manufacturing from a struggling factory into a profitable enterprise worth millions. My sister Paige is 37. She spent those same 15 years taking executive salaries while contributing almost nothing to the actual work. She showed up for board meetings, smiled at investors, and collected her checks. Our father, William Brooks, founded the company 40 years ago. He built it with his own hands, literally. Started in a garage, grew it into a factory, then into a manufacturing empire that employed 300 people. When he died 3 years ago, he left the company to both of us. Equal shares, equal responsibility, equal say in all major decisions. Paige called it unfair. Said she deserved more because she was better with people, better at the public face of the business. I called it exactly what Dad intended. A partnership that required both of us to agree on big moves. What I didn't say, what I never told her, was that Dad had pulled me aside 2 months before he died. He'd gripped my hand, his fingers weak but determined. "Watch her," he'd whispered. "She's got your mother's impulsiveness. Smart, but reckless. You're the careful one. That's why I need you to protect what we built." Now, sitting in this lawyer's office, I understood exactly what he'd meant. Paige smiled at me then. It was small and tight, but unmistakably victorious. The smile of someone who thinks they've just won the game. "Look," she said, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "I know you're upset, but this is for the best. The company was holding us both back. $8 million, Natalie. We can finally do what we want." "We?" I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Her smile faltered slightly. "The money will be split 50-50, obviously. $4 million each. Think about what you could do with that." I could think of many things. I could think of the employees who would lose their jobs when Apex Industries inevitably streamlined operations. I could think of the legacy Dad had built being carved up and sold for parts. I could think of the contracts I'd personally negotiated, the systems I'd implemented, the relationships I'd cultivated. But mostly, I thought about the shareholder agreement, the one we'd both signed 10 years ago. The one Paige had clearly forgotten existed. "Did you read the agreement before you sold?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "What agreement?" "The shareholder agreement Dad made us sign." Her face went slightly pale. "That old thing? That was years ago. It doesn't matter anymore." I stood up, gathering my bag. "Actually, it matters quite a lot. 10 years earlier, when Brooks Manufacturing first became profitable enough to attract outside interest, Dad had insisted we sign a joint shareholder agreement. He'd hired the best corporate lawyer in Chicago to draft it. The document was 30 pages long, filled with legal language that made my eyes cross. But Dad had made us sit there and read every single word. Then he'd made us read it again. "This protects both of you," he'd said, his voice serious, "and it protects the company. No one person can make major decisions alone. You both have to agree in writing before anything significant happens." Paige had called it dramatic and unnecessary. She'd signed it with a flourish, barely reading past the first page. She was 27 then, more interested in the company credit card than the company structure. I was 31. I'd just finished my MBA and was learning the manufacturing business from the ground up. I'd read every word of that agreement twice. Then I'd kept a copy in my personal safe at home. The agreement was ironclad. No unilateral sales, no major decisions without written consent from both parties. No exceptions, no loopholes, no ways around it. It also included penalty clauses, specific, detailed consequences for anyone who violated the terms. Dad had insisted on those over the lawyer's objections. "People need to know there are real costs to betrayal," Dad had said. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. Now I understood he was being prophetic. Back at the Brooks Manufacturing office, people whispered. The news had spread fast. My sister had sold the company. The employees were worried about their jobs, their futures, their families. I walked through the factory floor and conversations stopped as I passed. People looked at me with questions in their eyes, questions I couldn't answer yet. She finally took control. I heard someone say behind me. The voice was bitter. "Always knew she'd find a way to push Natalie out." I kept walking, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The machines hummed around me, the familiar sound of production that I'd grown to love over the years. Control is loud right before it collapses. That was something Dad used to say. He'd seen businesses fail, watched CEOs get too confident, too comfortable. He knew that the moment you think you've won is usually the moment before you lose everything. Paige had called me twice since the lawyer's meeting. I'd let both calls go to voicemail. Her messages were increasingly frantic, trying to smooth things over, trying to make me understand that this was good for both of us. She didn't understand yet. Didn't realize what she'd done. Didn't see the consequences lined up like dominoes, ready to fall. I reached my office and locked the door behind me. Time to start pushing. Paige showed up at my office that afternoon without knocking. She strutted in wearing a new designer suit, probably purchased with the advance money from the sale. Her confidence filled the room. "I'm stepping into executive leadership at Apex," she announced. No question, no discussion, just a statement of fact. They offered me a position as VP of Operations. 6-figure salary, full benefits, company car. She perched on the edge of my desk like she owned it. Like she owned everything. "You should talk to them too. They're looking for someone to manage the transition. It could be good for you." I looked up from my computer. Manage the transition to what? To the new structure. Apex has big plans for modernization. They want to streamline, make things more efficient. Streamline means layoffs. She shrugged. "That's business, Natalie. You can't be sentimental about these things. Dad would understand." That was too much. Dad would understand. Dad built this company to provide jobs. He knew every employee by name. He went to their kids' graduations and their parents' funerals. And he died exhausted and broke, Paige shot back. This company drained him. I'm not making the same mistake. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "The deal is done. You can fight it if you want, but you'll just look bitter and difficult. Take the money, Natalie. Move on." After she left, I pulled up the shareholder agreement on my computer and started reading. Again. That night, I sat in my home office with a glass of wine and the shareholder agreement printed out in front of me. I read every clause carefully, highlighting the relevant sections. Some people read mystery novels for comfort. Some people watch cooking shows or scroll through social media. I read legal documents. There's something soothing about the precision of contract law, the way everything is spelled out clearly with no room for misinterpretation. Section 7. Sale of shares. Neither party may sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of their shares without prior written consent from the other party. Such consent must be provided in writing and notarized. I'd never given consent, never even been asked. Section 8. Unauthorized actions. Any party who attempts to sell shares without proper authorization shall be held personally liable for all damages, legal fees, and costs associated with reversing the transaction. Not corporate liability. Personal liability. That meant Paige's personal assets were on the line. Section 12. Remedies. This was the section that made me smile. Dad had been thorough. The agreement outlined specific penalties, including forced buyback at the original purchase price plus damages, payment of all legal fees, and potential forfeiture of future profits. I took a long sip of wine and closed the document. Tomorrow, I would make my first move. Tonight, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The clause was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean, direct, impossible to misinterpret. Unauthorized sale equals personal liability, not corporate, personal. I read it 3 more times, looking for loopholes, finding none. Dad's lawyer had been worth every penny. Personal liability meant everything Paige owned was at risk. Her house, her car, her savings, her investment accounts. Everything she'd accumulated over the years, including the money she'd already received from Apex Industries. The agreement also specified that if the sale was reversed, the party responsible for the unauthorized sale would bear all costs. That included legal fees, penalties, interest, and any damages to the company's reputation or operations. I calculated the numbers in my head. Apex had paid $8 million for the shares. Legal fees for this kind of corporate litigation could easily run into hundreds of thousands. Add penalties and damages, and Paige could be looking at a bill of $10 million or more. She didn't have that kind of money. She'd been living beyond her means for years, spending her salary as fast as it came in. The house she'd bought 2 years ago was mortgaged to the maximum. Her car was leased. Her designer wardrobe was probably financed on credit cards. I closed my laptop and turned off the light. The dominoes were set up. Now I just needed to give them the gentlest push. The new investor, a man named Victor Kane from Apex Industries, toured the facility the next week. I watched from my office window as Paige led him around, gesturing grandly at the equipment and chattering nonstop. I declined the invitation to join them. Better to let Paige hang herself with her own words. Victor asked smart questions. I could see that even from a distance. He stopped at various stations, examined processes, checked quality controls. He took notes on a tablet, his expression serious and analytical. These were questions Paige couldn't answer. Technical questions about production capacity, efficiency ratings, quality control protocols. Things she'd never bothered to learn because she'd never cared about the actual work of manufacturing. I watched her fumble, watched her smile grow more strained as she realized she was out of her depth. She kept gesturing to employees, asking them to explain things, positioning herself as the facilitator rather than the expert. Victor noticed. I could see it in the way his questions became sharper, more probing. He was testing her, trying to figure out if she actually knew how to run this operation. She didn't, and now Apex was starting to realize what they'd bought. I stayed quiet in my office, watching through the window. Let her speak. Let her make promises she couldn't keep. Every word was another nail in her coffin. Paige overpromised everything. I heard about it later from the production manager, a woman named Carmen who'd worked here for 20 years. She told them, "We could increase production by 40% within 6 months," Carmen said, her voice incredulous. 40%? We'd need to hire 50 more people and add an entire shift. Where does she think we'd get the workers? I made a note of that. Unrealistic production promises. And she said we could cut costs by 30% without affecting quality. That's impossible. We're already running lean. Any more cuts and we'll start seeing defects. Another note. Impossible cost reductions. She also told them we have contracts with companies we don't actually work with, said we supply parts to 3 major automotive manufacturers. We supply parts to one, and that contract is up for renewal in 6 months. I kept writing. False claims about clients. Carmen leaned against my desk. She's going to destroy this place, isn't she? No, I said quietly. She's going to destroy herself. Paige had skipped the due diligence disclosures. She'd painted a picture of a company that didn't exist, making promises she had no way of keeping. When Apex discovered the truth, they'd be furious. And I was carefully documenting every single false claim she made. I sent one email, just one, to the legal department at Apex Industries. Subject line, clarification request regarding Brooks Manufacturing acquisition. The body of the email was brief and professional. No accusations, no anger, just facts presented as helpful information. Dear legal team, I wanted to bring to your attention some discrepancies I've noticed in the documentation regarding the sale of Brooks Manufacturing. As a 50% shareholder, I was surprised to learn of this transaction, as I do not recall providing the required written authorization outlined in our shareholder agreement. I've attached a copy of the relevant agreement for your review. I'm certain this is simply an administrative oversight, but I wanted to ensure all proper procedures were followed. Please let me know if you need any additional documentation. Best regards, Natalie Brooks. Polite, concerned, helpful, not at all threatening. I attached the shareholder agreement with Section 7 highlighted in yellow. Then I hit send and went back to work. The response came 3 hours later. The head of legal at Apex wanted to schedule a call immediately. Could I speak with them tomorrow morning? I replied that I'd be happy to discuss the matter at their convenience. Then I forwarded the entire email chain to my own lawyer with a note. It's beginning. Funding stalled within 48 hours. The wire transfer that was supposed to complete the sale was put on hold pending further investigation. I heard about it from Carmen, who heard it from Paige's assistant, who'd been crying in the bathroom. They're reviewing everything, she'd sobbed. Every document, every contract, every claim Miss Paige made. Apex's legal team had requested documentation that Paige couldn't produce, proof of the contracts she'd mentioned, evidence of the production capacity she'd promised, verification of the cost-cutting measures she'd guaranteed. They also wanted proof of my authorization for the sale. The signed consent form required by the shareholder agreement, the notarized document that had never existed. Paige's confidence cracked for the first time. I saw it when she came to my office, her face pale under her makeup. The designer suit looked rumpled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. They're asking questions, she said without preamble. About you, about your signature, about the agreement. I imagine they are. Tell them it's fine. Tell them you approved the sale. I looked up from my computer, but I didn't. Natalie, please. This is important. I agree. Honesty is very important. She stared at me, and I saw the moment she finally understood. This wasn't going away. This wasn't something she could smooth over with charm and excuses. You're really going to do this, she whispered. I'm not doing anything. I'm simply telling the truth. She cornered me in the hallway the next day, her voice low and urgent. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to ruin this deal? I met her eyes calmly. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm simply pointing out that proper procedures weren't followed. You know what I mean. You're sabotaging this on purpose. Am I? Or am I just refusing to lie for you? Her face flushed red. This company is half mine. I have every right to make decisions about my shares. You do, I agreed, but not about my shares, and not without following the agreement Dad made us sign. That agreement is ridiculous. It's outdated. No one follows those kinds of restrictions anymore. Apex's legal team seems to disagree. They're very interested in that agreement. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. If this deal falls through, I lose everything. The job offer, the money, all of it. Then you should have thought about that before you forged my signature. The words hung in the air between us. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, she turned and walked away without another word. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a distant sadness for the sister I used to know. The one who existed before greed and ambition twisted her into someone unrecognizable. Brooks Manufacturing initiated a compliance review 3 days later. The board, which consisted of me, Paige, and 3 outside directors, voted 3-2 in favor. External auditors. unforgiving in their thoroughness. They would examine every aspect of the sale, every document, every claim. Page voted against it, of course. So did one of the outside directors, a man named Preston, who'd always been more loyal to Page than to the company. But the other two directors understood the severity of the situation. Apex was threatening to sue for misrepresentation. We needed to know exactly what had been misrepresented. The auditors arrived on Monday morning. 3 people in gray suits carrying briefcases and laptops. They set up in the conference room and started requesting files. They were polite but relentless. Every claim Page had made was examined. Every promise was verified. Every number was checked against actual records. Page stopped sleeping. I could see it in her face, the exhaustion that makeup couldn't hide. She started arriving late and leaving early. The confident strut was gone, replaced by nervous glances over her shoulder. The employees noticed. Morale improved slightly. They could sense that maybe, just maybe, the sale wouldn't go through. Maybe their jobs were safe after all. I kept my head down and continued working. Let the auditors do their job. Let the truth speak for itself. They found the forged consent form on Thursday afternoon. It was buried in the sale documents, a single page with my forged signature authorizing the transaction. The auditors brought it to me first. "Can you verify this signature, Ms. Brooks?" I examined it carefully, though I already knew what I'd find. "No, that's not my signature." They showed it to a handwriting expert they'd brought with them. She compared it to my actual signatures on company documents. Her conclusion was immediate and definitive. "This is a forgery," she said. "A fairly good one, but definitely not authentic." They found other problems too. The rushed sale that hadn't allowed for proper due diligence. The inflated production numbers. The false claims about contracts and capabilities. The promises that couldn't possibly be fulfilled. Page had violated multiple clauses of the shareholder agreement. She'd misrepresented the company's capabilities to Apex. She'd forged legal documents. Each violation was carefully documented, photographed, and added to the growing file. The rules she'd never bothered to learn were now written out in detail, each one she'd broken highlighted in red. The auditor's report would be damning. When they called Page in to discuss their findings, she brought a lawyer. Too little, too late. I stayed in my office and waited for the inevitable conclusion. The investor walked away on Friday morning. Apex Industries formally withdrew their offer to purchase Brooks Manufacturing. The email from their legal department was polite but firm. Given the significant discrepancies between the representations made and the actual state of the company, combined with questions regarding the validity of shareholder consent, we believe it is in everyone's best interest to terminate this transaction. They wanted their deposit back immediately. All $2 million of it. The deal collapsed under its own weight, buried by lies and forged signatures and broken rules, exactly as it deserved to. I received a copy of the email. So did the board of directors, so did our lawyers. Page received it too, along with a formal notice that Apex was considering legal action for misrepresentation and fraud. She didn't come to the office that day, or the next. Her assistant said she was sick, but we all knew the truth. She was hiding. The employees celebrated quietly. Their jobs were safe, at least for now. The company they'd helped build wasn't being sold for parts after all. I felt no triumph, just a deep exhaustion and a wish that none of this had been necessary. But Page had made her choice. Now she had to live with the consequences. The sale was formally nullified the following week. The shares reverted to their original status, split 50-50 between Page and me, governed by the shareholder agreement she'd tried to ignore. But the losses remained. The $2 million deposit that needed to be returned to Apex, the legal fees from multiple law firms, the audit costs, the damage to the company's reputation in the industry. Someone had to pay for all of that, and the shareholder agreement was crystal clear about who. Section 8, the unauthorized action clause, spelled it out in language that left no room for interpretation. The party responsible for the unauthorized sale bore full personal liability for all costs associated with reversing the transaction. My lawyer drafted the formal demand letter. It outlined every cost, every fee, every expense that had resulted from Page's illegal sale attempt. The total came to $3.2 million. Paige's share of the company was worth $4 million. She technically could pay it, but only if she sold her shares to me at fair market value, and only if she liquidated every other asset she owned. The letter gave her 30 days to respond. After that, we would file a lawsuit and obtain a judgment that would allow us to seize her assets. I signed the letter and had it delivered by courier. Personal service, with a witness to confirm she received it. Then I went back to work, running the company we'd almost lost. Paige was personally responsible for every dollar. The agreement made that abundantly clear, and my lawyer had confirmed it with 3 separate legal opinions. She couldn't hide behind corporate protections, couldn't claim ignorance, couldn't declare bankruptcy to escape the debt. The shareholder agreement had been specifically written to prevent all of those escape routes. Legal fees alone were approaching $500,000. We'd had to hire attorneys to defend against Apex's threatened lawsuit, to negotiate the return of their deposit, to handle the compliance review and audit. The audit itself had cost another $150,000. Professional fees for handwriting experts, forensic accountants, and corporate investigators added another $100,000. Then there were the damages. The contracts we'd lost because of the uncertainty. The clients who'd looked elsewhere during the chaos. The employee morale problems that had affected productivity. My lawyer estimated those damages at $1.5 million, and he had documentation to support every penny. Add it all together, and Paige owed $3.2 million. To the company, to be paid immediately. Her phone calls went straight to voicemail now. Her lawyer sent responses that were increasingly desperate, asking for payment plans, requesting extensions, suggesting settlements. But the agreement was clear: immediate payment or legal action. No negotiations, no compromises, no mercy. Dad had written it that way for a reason. Her house went first. The beautiful colonial in the suburbs with the circular driveway and the 3-car garage. The house she'd bought to impress her friends and neighbors. It sold quickly in a forced sale. She netted $1.8 million after paying off the mortgage and the real estate fees. Then the accounts. Her investment portfolio, her retirement savings, everything she'd immersed, accumulated over 15 years of executive salaries. Another $900,000. Still not enough. The car went next, the leased BMW that she'd loved so much. The lease was bought out for $40,000. Her jewelry, her designer clothes, her art collection, everything she'd bought to showcase her success was liquidated at auction. Another $200,000, bringing her total to $2.9 million. She was still $300,000 short. The title she'd barely worn at Apex was long gone. They'd rescinded the job offer the day after the deal fell through. VP of Operations for exactly 0 days. She'd lost everything trying to take what wasn't hers to sell. And she still owed money. My lawyer filed a lien against her future earnings. Any salary she made at her next job would be garnished until the debt was paid in full, with interest. I felt no satisfaction in her destruction, just a grim acknowledgement that this was justice. She stopped coming to the office after the second auction of her belongings. Her assistant cleared out her desk, packing her things into boxes that Paige never came to collect. She stopped answering calls from me, from the lawyers, from the board of directors. She just disappeared from the business world entirely, retreating to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard about her occasionally through mutual acquaintances. She was working at a consulting firm now, a significant step down from her previous position. Her salary was being garnished, so she was living on a fraction of what she used to make. I didn't reach out. What would I say? I'm sorry I held you accountable for breaking the law? I'm sorry I refused to let you destroy Dad's legacy? Closure doesn't require conversation. It doesn't require forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes closure is just the absence of chaos, the return to stability, the knowledge that justice was served. I focused on running Brooks Manufacturing, on rebuilding the relationships Paige had damaged with her lies, on restoring the company's reputation in the industry. The employees were grateful. They worked harder, more dedicated than ever. They knew how close they'd come to losing everything. And I knew I'd done what Dad had asked me to do 3 years ago. I'd protected what he built. I'd watched my sister carefully, and when she tried to destroy it all, I'd stopped her. The board voted unanimously to ask me to assume sole operational authority. They wanted clear leadership, someone they could trust, someone who understood both the business and the importance of following proper procedures. I said yes, but with conditions. New safeguards, better checks and balances. No single person would ever again have the power to unilaterally sell the company. We updated the corporate bylaws, added additional board members, implemented quarterly compliance reviews, created whistleblower protections for employees who spotted problems. Everything Paige had tried to circumvent was now reinforced with multiple layers of protection. The company was stronger for having survived her betrayal. My salary increased to reflect my new responsibilities. I hired a CFO to help manage the financial side, someone Dad would have approved of. Someone careful and ethical and thorough. We settled with Apex Industries out of court. They dropped their threatened lawsuit in exchange for first rights on any future sale. It was a fair compromise that left both parties satisfied. Brooks Manufacturing moved forward, stronger and more stable than it had been in years. And I slept soundly every night, knowing I'd honored Dad's legacy and protected the 300 people who depended on this company for their livelihoods. Paige resigned formally 6 months after the failed sale. The letter came through her lawyer, brief and professional. Please accept this letter as formal notification of my resignation from all positions at Brooks Manufacturing, effective immediately. I am willing to discuss the sale of my remaining shares at fair market value. No farewell, no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd tried to do or the damage she'd caused, just consequences, catching up to someone who thought she was above the rules. I bought her shares at a fair price, determined by an independent valuation firm. $4 million, minus the $300,000 she still owed. She received a check for $3.7 million and walked away. It was less than she would have gotten from Apex, but more than she deserved after what she'd done. With her resignation and the purchase of her shares, I became the sole owner of Brooks Manufacturing. Exactly what Dad had probably known would happen eventually. He'd understood both of his daughters, the careful one and the reckless one, the builder and the destroyer. He'd known that eventually Paige would overreach, would try to take more than she'd earned, and he'd prepared for it. Written rules that protected the company and punished the betrayal. Given me the tools I needed to survive her ambition. I never saw Paige again after she signed the share transfer documents. We became strangers, connected only by blood and shared history. The company stabilized quickly after Paige's departure. New investors emerged, people who understood manufacturing and respected the company's history. People who wanted to build rather than strip for parts. We implemented the modernization plans slowly and carefully. New equipment that made us more efficient without cutting jobs. Updated systems that improved quality control. Better training programs that gave employees opportunities to grow. Clean leadership makes a difference. When people trust the person at the top, when they know decisions are being made ethically and transparently, everything runs smoother. My reputation in the industry was intact. Better than intact, actually. The story of how I'd saved Brooks Manufacturing from a hostile takeover by my own sister spread through business circles. I started getting calls about consulting work, speaking engagements, board positions at other companies. People wanted to know how I'd done it. How I'd stopped the sale. How I'd held my sister accountable. How I'd protected the company while following all the proper legal procedures. The answer was always the same. I read the contract, I followed the rules, and I didn't let emotions override good business sense. Brooks Manufacturing was thriving now. Growing steadily, responsibly, sustainably. Exactly the way Dad had built it originally, before Paige's recklessness had threatened to destroy it all. I was 42 years old, and running a company worth $12 million. All mine. All protected. All secure. I didn't win because I outplayed my sister. That's what people get wrong when they hear this story. They think it's about being smarter or more ruthless or better at business. It's not. I won because I respected the rules she ignored. Simple as that. Dad had built protections into the shareholder agreement because he understood human nature. He knew that someday, someone might try to take shortcuts, might get greedy, might forget that businesses are built on trust and honest dealing. Paige had forgotten that. Or maybe she never learned it in the first place. She'd thought the rules didn't apply to her. Thought she could forge a signature, make false promises, sell what wasn't fully hers to sell. She'd counted on me being too nice, too passive, too afraid of family drama to hold her accountable. She was wrong. Blood may be thicker than water, but contracts are thicker than arrogance. They're thicker than entitlement. They're thicker than the assumption that family loyalty means ignoring betrayal. Dad knew that. He'd written it into every clause of that shareholder agreement. Protection for the careful child, consequences for the reckless one. I keep a copy of that agreement framed in my office now. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Rules matter, procedures matter, ethics matter. And sometimes, the best way to love someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. Paige lost everything she'd accumulated trying to take what wasn't hers. I protected everything Dad had built by simply following the rules he'd established. In the end, that made all the difference.